The idea of failure looms dark and large in our heads and our hearts. Most of us avoid failure at any cost, even when our fear of failure keeps us stuck and unfulfilled. What if failure could be turned upside down or inside out to become a positive rather than a negative? What if failure, as part of being naturally imperfect, could become a friend and a real ally? Today, we'll focus on this listener's real-life question. I failed miserably at several relationships, and now I've lost my savings and more in a failed business adventure. I need to get my head on straight because I'm procrastinating about getting back into life. Do you have any tips that might get me on my way? And with that question as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manley, and this is Imperfect Love. Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manley, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are not perfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life. And now I am absolutely thrilled to introduce today's fabulous guest, Dr. Shelley Davidow. She is a prolific author, a nature lover, and a university professor. And one of her specialties in life is helping us learn how to fail brilliantly. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Shelley. I'm so glad you've been able to make time for us the whole way from Australia.
Thank you so much, Carla. It's lovely to be here with you today.
It's a joy. So before we get going, please tell our listeners a little bit about what makes you, you.
What makes me, me is coming from South Africa originally. I feel like I grew up on a continent that was very volatile in many ways and very beautiful. And I had to leave quite young. And I feel like the idea of running away has kind of defined me because I feel like I've done 5 continents now with the idea of jumping from the frying pan into the fire. So when you run away from home, you're not necessarily looking at where you're going to, you're focusing on where you're running from. Mm-hmm. And I've learned that that's perhaps rather a difficult thing because maybe you need to change that and look more towards where you're going rather than where you're coming from. And so I think my life has been a runaway, and that makes me, me. Well, that's one of the things that makes me, me.
Oh my goodness, that's so beautiful and poignant. That first runaway from South Africa. How old were you?
I was 22 when I left.
So and you like that's early. And what made you run, if you don't mind me asking?
At the time, and I think much has not changed, but at the time, there was just so much indiscriminate violence everywhere. Mm. And you felt it in the air, you breathed it in. Some people can cope with it and live with it. I couldn't. And I vowed that as soon as I was able and I had enough money in my bank account, I would leave. And so I did. And also the economy was failing, and it was a very difficult situation to be in. So it's kind of taken me 3 decades to reach square one. And I think that idea of runaway, it teaches you a lot about life. So on the way running, I obviously had jobs that were jobs of necessity, not necessarily always of choice. And eventually what was necessary became what I chose, because life is imperfect. And if you wrote the perfect script, it might be quite boring. So I've learned to welcome the unexpected and turn it into something that I choose to handle in a specific way. So that was my lesson from the beautiful universe, which kept shoving it in my face.
Now, did it take, is what you were saying that it took 30 years for you to get that lesson?
I think so. I think it did because, I think we rail against anything that's unpleasant or, why did I spend 3 years in the desert with a tiny baby in the Middle East? Or why did I spend another 3 years, with no work visa in a freezing cold climate in Oregon? with a 2-year-old. Why did I do these things? I railed against those at the time. And then later on, much later on, as I was writing, I started to see, oh, but these are the gifts. These are the things that are most precious to me, because they had lessons in patience and transformation and evolution of self in them that I could never have received had my life been the cushy, beautiful, like white pillow pathway that I imagined for myself.
I like that, the white pillow pathway. And I have to say, taking 3 decades to learn a lesson, that is a pretty darn good learning curve, because there are so many people, and I'm sure myself included in some ways, that say, oh, well, I didn't get that lesson, even though it was in my face for many decades. And so it's almost like a snowball effect, isn't it? Sometimes, especially, and sometimes the universe is just relentless, and it makes the lesson bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it's right in the front door and you can't get out the front door because that snowball got so big. And then you have to push it. You have to get through it. So my goodness, what a journey. So you're an expert in failure. So when we turn and we look at today's question, from the person who's failed in relationships, now failed with a business venture, and feels very hopeless, it sounds, confused, procrastinating, which I'm sure most of us can that resonates with us in some way, because failure isn't easy, especially when we look at it as being a dark, negative, really horrific thing. It hurts.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And you said we could turn this question inside out, maybe side. So I want to do that. The book that I wrote, Fail Brilliantly, with my partner, Paul Williams, was really based on exactly this idea that we look at our lives in terms of success and failure. And I want to say that failure, when I researched it, as a personal thing that happens to you where you call yourself a failure, was only really a concept after the 1800s. Because before that, there was really no idea of personal failure. Failure meant not arriving at your destination or not getting to, you had aimed to get to by a particular time. So what if, and this was my life lesson, because I've failed at all these things. I've failed at continents. I've failed at owning houses. I've had nothing. I've had absolutely nothing. But what if we looked at failure as simply an unexpected outcome that has no judgment in it? It's not what we wanted, and it's not what we anticipated, and it's not what we planned for. And that sounds pretty much like life. Life is like that. So you have no freedom in picking that outcome. So if it's an unexpected outcome, then the freedom that is given to us is, how do we deal with that? And what is the story that we tell ourselves about that failure? Like, yes, it hurts, but I would like to say that there is, to me, I've divided failure into 3 segments. And the first kind of failure is what I would say, this is a real failure. These are first-degree failures. That's when planes don't arrive at their destinations, or, a ship goes down and you will never get those people back. That to me is real, that you can't come back from. But second-degree failures are failures that you head in one direction, but you end up going in another. So you set out to get to the moon and you don't get there, but maybe you learn something along the way, or you come back alive. That's not a failure. It's a learning curve. And then the third kind of failure, which is third-degree failures, are the ones that we decide are failures. So we draw a line and we say, this is success and I'm trying to get there. And, or a pass mark is 40% or 80%. And the minute we draw that line, if we fall short of it, we say, oh, we failed, or you failed the exam. But those are parameters that we've created for ourselves. So me, as an author, I could say, what does success look like? At first it was, I just want to get a book published. And now it's like, now that I've got so many books out, it changes. The goalposts are always shifting. And that's the case too with every venture that fails, or where you don't reach the destination. Even if you do get to that destination, the goalposts will change. So I feel like our choice is then, what do we make of this journey and what story do we want to tell ourselves? Because we write the script. So if I say, oh, this always happens to me, I'm a failure, I can never make it, I always make bad decisions, then that becomes my identity. Or I can say, I'm a resilient, enterprising hero on a quest, and today I'm going to get up and fight dragons, and I'm going to look under the bed and I'm going to check that monster in the eye, and I'm going to be like, come out and have breakfast with me and let's talk about things. Maybe you can stop scaring me. Maybe maybe we can sing a song together. I don't know. Maybe you become my partner instead of the scary things. So as a story maker, I'm so aware of the power of the narratives that we tell ourselves. And so I would say to that question about failure, what if we change the story? It's not a failure. It's an unexpected, unwanted outcome. But how do we turn this into a hero's journey? How many, I don't know how many feats Odysseus had to go through, or, how many, I think it was, or Hercules, like the 12 labors of Hercules. How many victories are you going to want to have today? And the victories are personal ones. It's like, how do I not fall apart at this particular juncture? That's my challenge. And you have control over that. So I don't know if that gives you, a sideways look at that question, which I feel, society likes to say success, failure, and, yes, you can learn from your mistakes, but they're still mistakes. And yeah, but what if they're not? What if they're just adventures and the outcomes are just, anything can happen, and maybe you'll be a wiser, kinder person at the end of this. You'll have something to say to someone else that will be helpful. The positives are immense and endless, really, what can come of that story.
And what a beautiful way to break it down, to really shift it that way. This is just an unexpected place that I arrived. I wanted to go from here to there in my relationship, in my business adventure, whatever it was, but I arrived somewhere else. So I love that piece. I also love the piece where there are degrees, the 1st degree failure, the 2nd degree failure, the 3rd degree failure. And really the only one that's truly, truly horrific is the first one, because, we're talking loss of like something very calamitous. And then the other piece that I absolutely love that you brought in is the power of our narratives. And you are, a consummate storyteller. 48 books so far, Dr. Shelley? Are you losing count?
I'm actually losing count. I've got a new book coming out next year with HarperCollins, and it's a novel. And I think that will be 49. And then I have another book that I'm writing with a colleague, which is about parenting. And that one is also coming out next year. So I feel like it's probably going to be 50. So maybe I'm at 48. I don't know.
Okay. So we'll just give it a nice round 50. Now I'm going to turn this to you for a second. 50 books? That's huge. Have any of them felt like failures to you?
I hate to say this, but every single one of them feels in some degree like a failure, like it doesn't do what I want it to do, or doesn't have the impact, or doesn't make zillions of dollars. And so at every juncture, there's a sense of failure to arrive at the destination that I set for myself when I was, first writing. It's like, by the time I'm this age, I'm going to be living off my writing. Well, I'm still not. And so, yeah, so I'm a complete failure in terms of that. And if I turn that around, then I can say, what an unbelievable journey and gift this is. And would I do this even if books were not published, even if I never made a single dime or quarter from another book, would I still write and publish? And the answer is absolutely yes, I would. Because for me, it's not about success and failure deeply. It's actually about the process of writing, which is the process of being in the world. So yeah, I'm a total failure. There are like one-hit wonders. There are people who I teach writing to who self-publish online and live off it. They do. And they're not even brilliant writers. They just know how to tell a story, know how to market themselves, and off they go. And I'm like, how do you do that? You're amazing. Can you teach me something? So yeah, I probably have to admit that I feel like a classic failure when it comes to the goal that I set myself as a writer.
And yet here I am sitting on the opposite side, looking at you, through the camera and thinking what a success she is. It's, 50 books, whether they're make a penny or $1 million, right? Anyone who loves to write knows how hard it is to go through that writing process. No matter how much you enjoy it, it's still a huge labor of love. And you've birthed books 50 times. I mean, I'm looking at you with absolute awe, yet isn't it interesting how we can turn this sideways and upside down to see that in a perfect world, you would have 50 books that would all be bestsellers and you would be, doing whatever you do. You'd probably be sitting in a chair and continuing to write and just enjoying nature because that's who you are. But we can see how it would be so easy for someone who writes 1 book, 2 books to say, I'm a failure now, I'm giving it up. I am not, I set my sights on being New York Times bestselling author straight out of the gate, and therefore I am a failure. And I would see, same way I'm seeing you, as an absolute success because you give it, do what gives you joy. And as much as you would like the financial remuneration, you are getting your heart is giving back to you in huge ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the end, all the material, I think a lot of our sense of failure comes from chasing material success. So of course we have to survive. So there's that. There's a baseline. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We must first eat and feed our families and have a roof over our heads and all of that. And so when you're in the existential part of aiming for success, then that is real and that's evolutionary. We must survive. But beyond that, do I really need a new car? Do I really need a bigger house? Do I really need to, all of these things? Yes, of course, that would be lovely. But at that point, it becomes the chasing of material goods. And of course, you don't take any of that with you. And I've just had personal family lost someone very dear to me, and highlighted what was precious in life. And what is it that we value? And it comes down to the people that we love and the moments of connection that we have with those people. And that to me is everything. It's what we've done. It's how we've been with each other. It's the conversations we've had. It's that the other knows that they've been loved. That is what I think is the most precious. So that's completely in our hands in terms of how we feel and show and connect to others. And it always takes something a little bit dramatic, I think, to highlight what's precious, even in our own lives. It's when I've faced illness and struggle that I've treasured life and being well. And when I was a teenager, I would complain endlessly that my legs were fat, and had all these complexes and everything. And then as I grew older, then I would see people who had much bigger struggles than that. And it's like, oh, maybe I need to rethink this complaint because it's completely ridiculous now. And I think see things in perspective, not to undermine our struggles, but just to go, there are degrees of struggle, and this is not like right up there on the list. You can manage this. You need to manage this. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And I appreciate, first off, I'm so sorry for your loss. Loss, although a part of life, is something that can really tear our hearts apart. So my thoughts are with you. I am with you. I'm sorry. When you look at what you're illuminating here, how sometimes loss brings up a chance for a reset to say, okay, I might be feeling like a failure here, or here, but do I have love in my life? Maybe I don't have the house of my dreams or the car of my dreams, but do I have love in my life? And maybe some people are saying, no, I don't have love in my life. And then that also is pause, right? Right. We can pause right there and do a reset and say, well, how can I get love in my life? How can I succeed at giving love, at receiving love? And sometimes, I know we're on a tangent here, but sometimes that means really good self-care, really good self-love, volunteering, being with nature, taking it back to the basics again, because as you said, with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we sometimes forget that, those things we do need all of those things at the basic: food, clothing, shelter. And then we go up the pyramid, and at the very top is what? Self-actualization. That part of realizing who the self is. And we can make our journey that simple. And for the listener who wrote in saying, but what do? I failed at relationships, and now I failed at this business venture. Maybe it's time for a reset. What do you think? A chance for this listener to look and say, well, did I learn from something from each relationship? Because if we learn from relationships, then they're not really failures. Maybe the relationship imploded or exploded. But if we can take something away from it, it's not really a failure. It was an experiment that went a little wonky. And with a business adventure, right? How horrible to use up all your savings and more. But what would you say about that part of the journey for someone who's really now at a material place where that, the bottom level of the hierarchy is needs is, wait a second, maybe I don't have enough now for food, clothing, shelter.
I mean, and that is a real struggle. And I've been in that position. And then it's like the survival kicks in, and it's like, well, what can I do immediately to survive? What do I need to do? There's the philosophical part, which is really, if there was a gift in this, and I'm not saying there is, because sometimes there just isn't, or there isn't for a long time. But my question to myself would be, if there was a gift in this, what would it be? What could it be? What could I take out of this whole failed experiment that I can carry with me as some tool in my toolkit that will serve me in the future? So I also have a failed business. During COVID, I thought I got a whole tea business going, and I had an online Shopify site, and I designed these wonderful packages, and I had all these organic teas, and I realized I'm absolutely terrible at marketing, and also I don't have the stomach to kind of go the distance. So I can't lose for 5 years, which some people can. And so what I learned from that is I needed to pull back, and I took everything down, and I have a huge box of wonderful organic teas that, I'm giving away for presents. Everyone will get tea from now for the next 100 years. And I realized that I'm the kind of person who needs a regular income, and I'm not going to be the millionaire from that. And so I need to, work in my position, keep my day job is what I'm saying. So I don't know individual circumstances, but, one has to sustain oneself. And that morning that you wake up after you've decided this business is closing, it's like, well, what is the next adventure that is possibly going to put food on the table and make this survivable? And I've done it, and I've leapt off continents to other continents and had no money and worked in cafes and done whatever it takes, cleaned apartments, cleaned toilets, whatever it took. So I can really speak from experience and say, I believe that as long as we're alive and we have our health, we can put something in place to survive. I hope that's true for everyone. I know it's not always true, but yeah, there's no single answer for every single question. I believe in humanity. I believe in our resilience. I believe in that reader. If that reader and listener had the capacity to start a business and had that creative vision and went for it, I would say that is the gift. That's the superpower. There's vision, there's creativity, there's courage. Harness those.
And, I just have to pause to say thank you for sharing such personal experiences that really allow us to learn that we don't need to be embarrassed about failures. They're a fact of life, and that we need to pull from them and you're being so courageous and, here you're the expert, right? And you're saying, well, I've done this, I had to do that, and I failed here, and I've had to clean toilets and all of these things. And yet here you are, bright, shining, just an incredibly exquisite human being, and saying, and I picked myself up. I learned the lesson and I did the next thing. So what would you tell someone who feels so low that, I don't know how low this listener feels, sounds very like, hey, I'm procrastinating, I'm not wanting to get back in the world. How can someone, when life feels big and dark and awful and like, oh, I'm so embarrassed, so many failures, no. How can we take that next step? How do we awaken our superpower and say, you can do this, be that little engine that could?
Yes. For me, the great healer is nature. Mm-hmm. So for me, the first step is go and find a beautiful spot and sit in that beautiful spot. And it could be, like for me, it's by a lake or on the beach or under a tree, or it could even be in a corner of your house where you can see out of a window, but as close to nature as possible, because there's a resonance between us and living things. And, I know people like laugh at tree huggers, but we know enough now to know that nature is energy and it's full of the energy of growth. And we are part of nature. It's not humans and nature, it's us. Human nature, we are nature. So I would sit in a place that is full of nature, and I would breathe slowly and deeply and just connect with the moment and put all thoughts of what do I do next and how do I think and how do I feel, just put that all outside and just focus awareness on breathing and do it for 2 minutes. Start with 2 minutes each day. In that position with nothing, for me, strength comes. It's given. You don't have to go and grab it. You don't have to get it or find it or pull yourself out when you have no strength. For me, that gets given to you. And it's just an awareness of presence. And then something comes. A bird lands next to you and you feel a connection with that living thing. Or a bird flies past. Or in my case, maybe a giant lizard walks across your path and you think, that is something exquisite. I just haven't ever seen something like that so close up. And what a miracle. And slowly, the feeling of being alive and part of this ongoing process, I think becomes part of our awareness. And then without even wanting to feel better or feel joy, I feel that comes. So for me, it's very simple. Go into nature, breathe, start with 2 minutes, extend it to 5. You don't have to meditate or make any big plans. Just be present.
Just be present.
And watch what happens. Watch where strength comes.
I have a question. What would you say for the many millions of people who, you and I are blessed, we have nature accessible, within walking distance, right? What about someone who lives in the middle of a big city where nature seems far too remote to access maybe once a month? That would be extremely difficult, much less trying to do it every day. What would you say?
I would say close your eyes and sit anywhere you want. Put on some beautiful music or even a visual on YouTube of trees or ocean. Get sound and sight involved. If you can't have smell and touch, your senses can still be stimulated by sound and sight. And in that space, travel in your head to where that place feels nourishing. And again, put all the thoughts out of your mind and breathe in slowly and deeply. And just focus on that presence, the memory of the beautiful place, the anticipation of the beautiful place. Make a plan to get there when possible, if possible. And in the meantime, create that, because our bodies respond every moment to our thoughts. And our physiology, actually, our fight or flight system can be totally transformed. Our nervous system can be impacted by thinking relaxed thoughts. It's not a fantasy. It's not some woo-woo idea out there. That by breathing in deeply and looking at nature or listening to beautiful music while thinking about a beautiful place, you can actually calm your entire nervous system. And again, I would do 2 minutes of that in the morning or in the evening or both. and just focus on your own self as a generative, amazing miracle that will do amazing things that you can't even anticipate in this moment.
Thank you for bringing it down to such an accessible level. And I really appreciate it, because sometimes the idea of getting to nature seems very, very difficult. So for our listeners, don't worry. You can envision one of my favorite, places when I'm in the middle of a building is to envision being in a field of lavender. And I often carry lavender oil with me, and takes one whiff, close eyes, and there I am in this gorgeous field of lavender that I've, just created. And you're so right, Dr. Shelley, because that breathing, parasympathetic nervous system comes on board, heart rate decreases, fight or flight, response decreases, all of that, because our thoughts, our anxious thoughts, when we're telling ourselves we're no good, we're failures, we are actually causing ourselves to go into fight or flight mode, because we don't want to fail. We don't want to fail. And the tiger that's chasing us is our own mind. And so from what you're saying, just by dipping into this quiet space of nature, specifically of nature, of which we are a deep part, parasympathetic nervous systems coming on board, reduction in stress neurochemicals, and there we are, halting our fight or flight response and going into a place where now our unconscious brain, right, can come up and maybe be a little more forgiving, a little playful, a little more loving if we continue to do this day after day after day. Did I get you right?
Yes, absolutely. We actually create new neural pathways. Our brains love what is familiar, even if it's not good for us. So if we're always being triggered and we're always rushing off into the, oh my gosh, panic, that's what we will do as a baseline response. But the more we spend time allowing the parasympathetic nervous system to kick into gear, the more that becomes the new baseline. So you're absolutely right. When you do that 2 minutes in the morning and 2 minutes in the evening, you have your lavender oil, you have your lavender field, you are actually changing the way that your body responds to the situation, and you're making a new pathway, a new neural pathway, a new way of responding until that becomes the new baseline. I mean, I've used this method myself through all kinds of stresses, and I can't say that I'm now like the Buddhist monk, but I've definitely learned to manage my stresses, my panics better. I do have, I think, a shifted baseline, not an entirely new one, but a shifted one.
Absolutely, because what you're saying is then if I'm hearing you right, you create this new baseline where there's more resilience, less reactivity, less of the right, wrong type of thinking that if I didn't do this, then I am a complete failure. And so we now have more mental space, more emotional space, so that when we do face challenges, we then don't become immobilized and stuck in fear. We might feel really horribly for a while, but we can learn the lessons, pick things up, and then do the next wisest step.
Yeah, more love, less fear. That's what we want for each other and for ourselves.
Oh my goodness. I think that is a perfect note for us to end on. Thank you so much, Dr. Shelley. Where can our listeners find you?
Can be found on my website, which is www.shelleydavidow.com. And that's probably the best place to find me. I'm the only Shelley Davidow that I know of in the world, so I don't think you could go too wrong. And that's the best place. And my books are all on my website. Fail Brilliantly, which has a lot of what we talked about today in it, is there. And any new work or any workshops that are coming up will also be on the website.
And as of next year, listeners, you will be able to pick from 50 books. Oh my gosh. I'm stunned. I knew you were prolific. I had no idea it gotten up to 50. I'm so impressed. And you're the epitome of if one must fail, let's fail brilliantly like you. It's my goodness. And I really would love to share just one, really lovely ending piece a wrap-up quote, that a gift from you to all of us. Life is not a static walled city with a single entrance. I think that's just so beautiful and something that we can all hold close in our heart, that there are many entrances and sometimes we just don't see them at the time. So thanks again, Dr. Shelley, for your time. I'm most grateful.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. It's been such a joy.
Thank you. Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanley.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manley wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.